I thought you were talking about someone else. I want to thank the Men's Resources Tasmania for having me this morning, to Stig and Jonathan and Nikki, the lovely folks here at Royal Yacht Club of Tasmania, if I got that right.
Just say RYCT.
Got it. It's a beautiful day. And I just want to start off by just acknowledging the grim news around the world at the moment and within our own country. And I think we're going through some tough times. And I think it's just important that we take note of that. Cost of living crisis, housing crisis. I don't know of any family that's not struggling in some way, shape or form at the moment. Just want to acknowledge that. So I've been a journalist for about 30 years, and it all began actually at the Berlin Wall in 1989, when I was a backpacker. I had just finished university. I had studied economics. I had joined a firm that I'm sure you've all heard of called KPMG as an accountant. And I was set on a career path with KPMG, but then decided to go backpacking through Europe, and found myself in Europe in early 1990, and found myself traveling through Eastern Europe. Communism was collapsing, and found myself climbing the Berlin Wall after it had come down a few months earlier. And I was intoxicated. I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now, witnessing history having taken place. A few weeks later, I was walking along Red Square in Moscow. Gorbachev was still in power. He'd be gone in about a year's time. And I just decided then and there I wanted to watch history being made. I wanted to witness history. I wanted to cover war. And so I came back home, quit my job as an accountant, and decided I've got to get into journalism. And I found myself in Indonesia a couple of years later. Couldn't get a job in the Australian media, Peter. I don't know why that was. I didn't have a degree in journalism. I couldn't touch type, and I couldn't take shorthand. I couldn't even get an interview.
Gee, I got in with those qualifications as well.
So I found myself in Indonesia, and got hired by a news organisation called Reuters, which just happened to be the biggest multimedia news organisation in the world. And I got my wish to cover the world, basically. And as Peter mentioned, I covered the Bali bombings, the Boxing Day tsunami in Indonesia's Aceh province, 166,000 people killed in 20 minutes. Hard to believe that when you hear that said, but it was death and destruction on a scale that virtually no one has ever seen. I remember going to a press conference given by Colin Powell, the then the US Secretary of State. He had been a soldier during the Vietnam War. He had been the Chief of Staff of the US military when the first Gulf War occurred. He said he had never seen anything like it. He took a helicopter down that 250 kilometres of coastline. I went back to Aceh 6 months later, 12 months later, to report on the story. I covered earthquakes that people won't even remember, bomb attacks, and then of course Iraq. Did 3 stints in Iraq in 2003, 2004. Also covered Israel's withdrawal of settlers from the Gaza Strip in 2005, and was in Jerusalem for a year in 2006 when Israel went to war with Hezbollah in Lebanon. What is happening in Israel and Gaza right now is the worst violence I have ever seen in my reporting life. And I was in Iraq for more than 2 years. What's going on there now is horrific. I also worked in some places where it wasn't so traumatic. I was in Hong Kong when Britain handed Hong Kong back to China. And I was a young bureau chief in Hanoi in the late 90s, which was fascinating, watching a country emerging from the grip of decades of war. War with the French, war with the Americans, a young country trying to find its own feet. And we always, myself and my wife Mary, who was our TV producer at the time, always playing hide and seek with the Vietnamese authorities, who were always wondering, what are those Reuters people up to? And it was almost romantic in a way. But all this this caught up with me. And in 2016, I, as Peter mentioned, became suicidal over all the trauma that had accumulated, predominantly, mainly driven by the deaths of two of my staff who were killed in a US Apache gunship attack on the streets of Baghdad in 2007. These were young men, a photographer and a driver who were killed in an attack that was made famous when Julian Assange released footage of this attack, called it collateral murder. These men were just out looking for a story. They were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I felt enormous guilt over that. I failed to protect my staff. And the result of that guilt and shame that I felt drove me to the point of suicide. And later, when I've spoken to soldiers about this, spoken to coppers and so on, they got it. They understood where I was coming from, the sense of responsibility I felt towards my staff. But so all this trauma, all this guilt and shame accumulated, and I was on the brink of suicide up at home in Evandale. And luckily, I spoke to my wife. I told Mary how I was feeling, and she said, "We need to get you help. We need to get you into a psych ward. We need to get you into the best psych facilities we can find." And that was to get me onto the mainland. And 2 weeks later, I was in a psych ward called Ward 17, which is in Melbourne, caters to veterans and first responders. 2 weeks there. 2 weeks later, I was there. That was the start of my healing journey. I was in a place with very skilled clinicians and with people who were just like me. And, people often ask me, what was it like for the family to be living at home with someone who was suffering from severe PTSD like mine? What I say is, I'll tell you what it's like for a family living with a man with PTSD, all right? Most of us are men here, and this is International Men's Day. For a family living in a house with a man who has got PTSD is not fun. And my family were living with me for years with my PTSD. They were living with a man who was constantly on edge, who was emotionally not present, who was depressed, who would go to his bed and not say anything, who would jump at a door being slammed, at a plate being dropped. I was not violent, but that threat of violence was always there. And this went on for years. And Mary, my wife, tried for years to get me help, but in my stubborn maleness, I refused to believe that there was anything wrong with me because I was still doing a good job. I was still functional in my work, but I was absolutely dysfunctional in my personal life. And so we get to the breaking point. I'm on the brink of suicide. The family's about to fall apart. That's when I finally end up in a psych ward where I start to get the help that I need. And that first admission, that first 5 weeks, I came away from that with enormously equipped with an understanding of PTSD and the sort of things I needed to do. Not only that, the clinicians in the psych ward are talking to Mary. They are actually reaching out to her and saying, "How are you? Right? How can we help you?" And so it was this sort of multidisciplinary support that was being put in place. But I walked into that psych ward thinking, I'm going to walk out of that psych ward cured. No, it wasn't like that. It actually took, and that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, was because it's a long journey. And it took me 7 years to write this book. It's really taken, I guess, 7 years to be able to stand up here and talk like this in a way that, I feel pretty calm talking here. I couldn't have done this a few years ago because I was still on that healing journey. But having learnt so much about the trauma and what's important, I know that, and this is what the psych ward admissions have taught me, is that I need to, if my family is the top priority in my life, which they are, I need to look after myself. And it actually wasn't until my third psych ward admission that really sunk in, that if I'm going to be the best father and the best husband I can be, I have to look after myself. And when I do that, my family get the best of me. And I also actually work pretty well too, if I look after myself. And so I guess in a nutshell, what I've really learned over this journey is that the support of my family have just been so important to me. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for my partner Mary, wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my kids, but also my friends. You know, we talk about friendship, we talk about mateship. I have a group of mates who I have been friends with since university, and when I was first diagnosed with PTSD, I didn't tell them. They're all in Sydney and Brisbane and elsewhere. I didn't tell them that there was anything wrong with me. I just kept it to myself. That's another thing about men. We isolate, right? We don't say anything. And in a weird sort of way, and Peter will understand this because he's a journalist, the first thing they knew about my PTSD was when I wrote a story about it. Yeah. And my closest friend from university, he saw the story and he said, "What the hell? Why didn't you tell us?" And the next thing was, "What are you doing next week?" "I'm getting on a plane and coming down to see you." He got on a plane, we went into the Tarkine and went bushwalking. And then he said, "I'm going to get all these lads together and we're going to come down and see you in a few months' time and we're going to go out bushwalking." And we've done that every year since. That was in 2017. And so these guys got around me. And as it turned out, it's what started out as them supporting me has been a camaraderie of us supporting us, right? When one of our group has not been feeling so well, we get around them. That has been so important to me and to my mental health. I think the other thing as well that's been important for me has just been my determination to work out what was wrong with me, what was going on, where can I find those answers? And I say to people that, look, if you're struggling with these sorts of issues, you have to inquire, you have to try and work out and get to the bottom of it. It's not going to happen by itself. Just going to see a psych once, twice a month is not going to do it. You really have to be determined and obsessive about it. And if you do that, then you're going to find the answers. It's difficult, but it really is worth it. So, Peter mentioned that I've started work recently at the Head to Health Clinic up in Launceston. Who's heard of the Head to Health clinics here? That's very encouraging. These are clinics that the Australian government is setting up across the country. I think the Peacock Centre is now being called part of the Head to Health architecture now as well. These are drop-in clinics anyone can go to. They're free. They are there to help people who are in distress 7 days a week. And one of the things that these clinics can do is help people who might be in some sort of suicidal distress, for example, and who are looking out and need some sort of support, but people who can't get in to see their GP, or who don't want to go to hospital, or can't get in to see their psych, or who can't afford to see someone for all sorts of reasons. I think one of the themes for this meeting today was men are talking, are we listening? My sense is that men who reach out get discouraged quickly if they find the system unresponsive. It's often taken a loved one many months of encouragement to get men to reach out, or friends. It's taken them months of encouraging someone to reach out. It can be a real letdown. So, and in my case with my wife Mary, it took her years to get help. One of the things that I have found really encouraging about my short time at Head to Health, and I've only been there 2 weeks, has been two young men who've come in, who I've sat with, whose bosses have been so supportive of them. I've been absolutely delighted, absolutely amazed at how supportive their bosses have been. These two young men have been able to share their distress and their situation with their bosses, and their bosses have been 100% behind them. And this is what I want to end on this morning, is that I have always felt that despite the fact that our mental health system is in crisis, we all know that, despite the gains that we have made when it comes to talking about mental illness more openly as a society, the biggest gains we can make are in the workplace. This is where we can really take some positive steps to support people more if organisations and businesses are more willing to make their workplaces more supportive of their people. And so that's why it just really warmed my heart when I had these two young men come in and talk about how supportive their bosses were. So what I want people here to go away with today is to think about, is your workplace as supportive of your staff as possible, no matter what their gender? And what it comes down to is your workplace one where people feel comfortable putting their hand up and saying, I'm struggling, and not only do they feel comfortable, but have you got the supports in place that will assist them? Because I know from the work that I do, from the advocacy that I do, and from the people that contact me, that there are a lot of people in the workplace who are going through a crisis, but they just don't feel confident seeking help. They feel they're going to be discriminated against, or they just feel it's going to be a sign of weakness if they do so. It is a crisis. And so that's my call to arms. My call to action today is we need to act. Thank you very much.